Okay. I'm going to start talking so that people start coming back. Every year we learn from the arrangement of the conference. We've learned a few things from this year, or I certainly have, but we are going to do the ASM discussion before lunch. One, because the conversation is during lunch, follows this logically, and there are trains and planes and other minor things that have intruded. So my apologies, my bad. However, I can offer you this. So there has been a lot of discussion in this conference, weaving in and out of ASM. Obviously, extremely important subject. And we are very, very grateful to have developed what I would call a collaboration with Rachel Perks at the World Bank. I think 3 years ago was the first time that she was involved in our conference, and there was a great resonance in the ways that we approach things. And last year, we had a big discussion about what she was working on and what was in process. And at that time, we made a commitment to, one, ongoing communication, and we've been honored to be included in her consultations and webinars and things. And then, and now here we are. In every packet, there was a copy of the World Bank report. So that document is in every packet. And we are today, her title for this is Sharing in Sustainable and Responsible ASM Development Beyond Sourcing to Nurturing. And I say this to you before it happens, which is we commit to coming together again on this subject, and we're really honored at the partnership. So please, I give you Rachel.
Thanks, Lisa. Do we have Edward online? Do we know? Okay. It's okay.
We do.
I think, yeah, so could we get Edward up? Okay. Hi, Edward. We're running fabulously and famously late, and so apologies if we've kept you on the video. We're just getting started. I was just going to say a couple of framing remarks, and then we will turn it over to the panel. So thank you again, and really good to see you.
It's very good to see you, and I have been listening to some of the other interesting panels, so it's been a great pleasure.
Great. Okay, so as Lisa alluded to, we've been trying to advance a conversation over the last couple of years here around reframing and looking at engagement with the artisanal and small-scale mining sector. The product of that has been for the bank. Last September 2024, we released a new flagship report that really sets out the framework for our engagement and talks about how we see the sector in the present day. And that flagship report was about 2.5 years of research. We looked at over $1 billion of ASM financing since the 1980s, a third of that billion being World Bank investments. We did a massive amount of consultations, bilateral interviews, and also a very large quantitative survey with miners themselves to really understand what is going on. From governments and miners, we basically heard 4 things Governments have, in many ways, I think, lost control of the situation around ASM, particularly gold, and have come to the realization that their leadership is required, but they need help. Miners themselves prioritized occupational health and safety as a deep concern for them, environmental stewardship, and access to markets and to finance. When we also talked with the community of practitioners, many of whom are at the table here today, you know, the issues that people were raising after 50 years of engagement in the sector were, we're getting really tired of piloting and never finding a way to bring those pilots to scale. We continue to work in silos, even though we don't necessarily want to. And the private sector in particular wants to be more engaged, but is not entirely sure how to get engaged. And I think that is a theme we've been hearing over the last day and a half here. And I think it's important to reflect on how we got here. You know, for those of us who are in the ASM sort of space for decades, we know how we got here, but maybe for others it's not so clear. And so I thought if you would allow me just to say a couple words about why we're in this time of talking a lot about responsible, and why, you know, a lot of us are now trying to reintroduce the terminology sustainable, and how responsible and sustainable are actually mutually reinforcing. I don't believe there's a hierarchy. I actually think that they work in symbiosis, and that was a great conversation we had last night, a couple of us, and thank you for pointing out some of that last night. So when you think back to the 80s, support to the sector of ASM was really the World Bank and a couple UN agencies, and it was based on the premise that what we did with large scale, we can do with small scale. So it was all SME focused, hardcore technical work, introduction of technology, et cetera. And then we saw this progression in the 1990s towards alternative livelihoods, like how could we help miners to diversify their incomes, to both be agriculturalists, but also to be miners. And then we hit the mid-1990s and really the diamond crisis. And that's when we started to see a much more, let's say, enforcement kind of focus around the development of the sector. We saw the emergence of the KP that really came out of US legislation, and the DRC crisis, or crises, I should say, and the emergence of Dodd-Frank Act to respond to that. And we landed ourselves into this space as a result of due diligence, traceability, a lot of controversy around the effectiveness of these tools, right? And I think we're asking ourselves as an ASM community, you know, do we have the right sort of tools in place, and are we taking the right approach to dealing with the issues? And now we're in a situation where we have a massive gold crisis, and no one can deny the situation, and I know there was just some discussion again about Ghana. And at the same time, you know, globalization happened, and we have markets asking a lot of questions, we have consumers asking a lot of questions, and so regulation has largely stepped in to try to keep product moving through the system to the places where we need minerals in ways that protect companies, help them protect their reputation, but also allow miners to continue to thrive. And the systems themselves are imperfect. And unfortunately, we've landed ourselves in a situation in which a lot of the emphasis is on due diligence, traceability technologies, et cetera. And we've lost sight, in my view, and in the view, I think, of a lot of others on this panel, around engagement at the mine face. And really, how do we use the sustainability agenda to actually address a lot of the root causes that we're trying to address through the responsible lens? And so, what, for instance, the World Gold Council and ourselves have been doing, and a lot of other organizations are trying to do, is to see how we can bring back the sustainability agenda, as I said, acknowledging that the responsible work has to take place because companies have to be able to protect their businesses and to demonstrate being good stewards, interested in human rights, et cetera. But then how do we also promote a lot more of the upstream, what we say in the mining world, the upstream, the work with governments, the work with miners, et cetera. So those are some of the things that we wanted to explore today. And the paper itself sort of lands on this idea that we have a lot of the tools, we have a lot of the concepts, but the issue is how do we learn to kind of work better together? And this is this whole sort of idea emerging around an initiative around mining better together, promoting collaboration, and what that could look like. And so I asked Lisa if we could kind of put together a panel of people who, we don't want to talk about concepts today, we really want to talk practices that can help influence, inspire others. And so we're going to run through a couple of the Mining Better Together principles that you find in the document, and just sort of talk through what has that practically looked like for these organizations who, I have to say, as Uta said yesterday, they're trailblazers. They are phenomenal individuals who have made a lot of the jewelry industry, possible because of this, what we call upstream work at the mine face. So I'm going to move over here now, and hopefully we'll get Edward on the camera. Sorry, I should also say I was asked to also do some slideshows. So people have, various panelists have submitted some slides. We're just going to kind of let it run in the back. I don't think it'll be distracting, but it helps to kind of humanize what we're talking about. So. And you gave me instructions, and I forgot them already, so I'm so sorry. Oh, okay. So we'll play it in a bit after Edward's come in. Okay. So we were sort of brainstorming what are some of the key things that we wanted to talk about today. Sustainability and responsibility have a lot to do with trust and relationships. I wanted to start with Gina, and because we're trying to manage our time well. Gina, I wanted you to talk to us a lot about this idea of shared responsibility and what that means for you as an organization and what that means in the way that you work with various actors along the value chain.
All right. Thank you, Rachel, and thank you, everyone. We're pretty excited of being part of this consultation phase. Is that okay? Yeah. It's better. Thank you, Lisa. Because when we talk about mining better together, it really helps us to set the soil for what we need to do, and it's to work together and to enable the ecosystem that it's needed to work towards more responsible and sustainable practices. Mm-hmm. I definitely agree we need to go beyond not just responsibility, but to more sustainable practices. And today and yesterday, it's a great example. Just seeing the faces of each one of you that are coming over here to listen to others, what are we doing? And that's really important, because we have realized that it cannot be the job of just one person or one organization or one jeweler. It has to be all of us. So how do we do this? Well, and what is something I want to mention is I want to do some emphasis, Rachel, if you don't mind, on progressive improvement. Yeah. Yes. One thing that I like a lot from this is that you mentioned it's not just transformation and progress first, but also then you're going to achieve the high performance second. So first, we need to look at it as a progression, as a journey, as Estelle was mentioning before. Yesterday, I also had the chance to be in another panel, and I talked about standards as a common language. And I mentioned that there are some standards that are for those organizations that are like in the best of the best of practices. But to arrive over there, you need to go first to the first stages, and those that's why we developed together with other organizations the craft code. And this progressive path to start autonomously saying, well, we want to change, we want to improve practices, and to start this path, we need also to include right indicators. And that is something that Mining Better Together it's addressing as well. It's, for example, looking at those indicators from a gender perspective. That's really important because at the end of the day, that differentiated approach would help us have this idea of what is really happening, and not just in the mine site, also in the community as well, how these income opportunities are generating opportunities. For example, because, and I'm going to go back to the title, which is beautiful, the title of this panel about nurturing. What we are creating here is we are creating dignity, we are creating opportunities, we are creating hope. You were just mentioning a little bit of the historical approach to development. And now it's not the time to talk about who's guilty and, you know, this is the fault of whom. It's about how we can help, how can we get involved to move forward and to create opportunities for these artisanal and small-scale miners. So I've been trying to answer to that question about responsibility, about progressive improvement. I believe and that this phase we're going to start of consultations, and with the help of the World Bank, we're really going to be able to move forward. Just to finish, and I know we have short time, it's the importance of financial inclusion. That is something that we face every day. Yesterday I mentioned some examples in Peru, but it's the same in Colombia, it's the same in Ecuador. Every time we do exchanges between different miners, the same topic come arising. One of the things we have been doing is inviting people from the bank, representatives from the banks, so they can understand that the de-risking approach is not the approach that is going to help facilitate this enabling ecosystem. We need to be able to give them opportunities for financial inclusion and access to microcredit. This morning someone mentioned an example of microcredit and how it really creates a difference. So yeah, I'm going to leave like
That's excellent.
Okay.
Thank you, Gina. So working together is not always easy. Edward, I wanted to put the question to you. I mean, you and I have come to know each other quite closely over the last few years, and we're working very much together. Do you want to talk about sort of where you see, or the inspiration that that provides to you that you could share with others, but also what are some of the practical difficulties? I mean, it's not easy to always work together, but why do you think it's so important? I don't mean you and I, but it's not easy for two institutions, you know, or a group of actors who may not always share all the same, you know, understandings to work together. But why is it so important, and why do you remain so committed on this issue?
Well, just one observation about the state we find ourselves in. The gold price has, of course, surged 2 times over in the last 3 years. And that's clearly a very mixed blessing because we've got a whole range of issues in the ASM sector that are beyond the ability to control them of any one actor. So we have growing environmental risks, mainly related to mercury. We've got growing social risks. We've got, in particular, also issues around the fact that the illicit economy now associated with gold is so great that we've got a huge opportunity for organized crime and a growing connection also between corruption and the regulation of ASM. and in countries like Mali and Sudan, Venezuela, Colombia, gold-funded conflict. And that is creating, as you mentioned, Rachel, in the beginning, a, a huge crisis in the sector. And we really do need to get all hands on deck to see how we can move rapidly from a governance situation where many have traditionally thought of ASGM as being a rural subsistence occupation, which in some cases it still is, but to one that is also $100 billion in scale, and the processes and the standards are really insufficient to manage that. So to come to your question to me about why partnerships are so important is because I think the scale of the issues are so much beyond what any one of us is used to dealing with. We need to mobilize governments, we need to mobilize the energies of civil society, because in saying, as I will in just a moment, that we really do need to improve law enforcement, this is not about trying to criminalize small-scale miners. It's about trying to ensure that they are not exploited and that we can put together a coalition that can improve the situation of small-scale miners, improve their lived experience and their incomes, that we can help governments to manage a situation which in many cases is risking undermining security and stability, and working with miners' representatives, with communities, with large-scale miners, and with the supply chain. And I know that my valued colleague, Alan Martin from LBMA is with you today, because what we've been doing so far hasn't been enough and is in danger of being overwhelmed, which is why you and I, Rachel, have been getting to know each other so well over the last 2 years. And if there's time, I could say a little about the particular project that was launched formally last week in Ivory Coast, which brings together the Ivorian government, the World Bank, the World Gold Council, the Chamber of Mines, and some of the leading gold miners. And Ivory Coast has traditionally not allocated much in the way of land for small-scale miners, and yet the country still has produced 40 million into the illicit world. So the government is getting no benefit from it, and it is definitely a source of instability. What our partnership is aiming to do is to create a national dialogue and to create, as an initial staging post, 4 model small-scale mines, which will be established principally on land relinquished by by large-scale miners. And if the government then transfers that land to community co-ops, then the large-scale miners have given the assurance that they will remain involved. They won't just cut off the area that's being relinquished and go back to putting the fences up. They will work with those small-scale miners on safety, on environmental issues, on geology, and especially on helping to channel the gold into formal legal sectors. So, in summary, It's all about massively broadening the range of stakeholders with whom we all work, looking at different skills, looking at different reach, and trying to produce a new, ambitious model to this.
Thank you so much, Edward. So Ruby, I mean, GEM Fair is one of the most remarkable mine-to-market programs out there, and I want to say, you know, you've been operating now 7 years. You are someone who's deeply concerned about getting out of pilots and into scale, but now you're realizing that scale has consequences, scale has trade-offs, and scale, we have to make choices. Do you want to walk us through some of that internal sort of discussion you're having so that we all come to understand, you know, scaling things is not so simple, and what are some of the thought process behind it for you?
Absolutely. I think, as you rightly pointed out, Rachel, there are definitely trade-offs. It'd be lovely if we could just have a silver bullet, a QR code or something like that that would make everything beautiful on the ground at artisanal mine sites, and they could get their fair wage, they could get their goods to market, and maybe even get a premium off of that. It does not work that way. And I think that going back to basics, I think there's several key ingredients to a scalable initiative in the artisanal mining sector. The first is that artisanal miners need to want to partner with you. And I get my back up a little bit when conversations go towards, oh, artisanal miners are the risk. We need to take all these measures to make sure that they're kosher to work with, without even considering why would they want to supply you with their goods. There's really legitimate reasons why they are engaged in the trading relationships and value chains that they're engaged in. So the first one is incentive to participate, building that trust. I think the second one goes alongside this is continual support in the sector. We do not have enough examples of projects that have lasted long enough to really make a difference, sadly. And I've been in this space for 15 years, so I'm one of the juniors in the room, but still, I have not seen enough projects that have lasted long enough. Fairmind being maybe an exception. Yes, that continued support needs to be there. So as Rachel said, we've been in Sierra Leone with GemFair for almost 8 years, only with the support of De Beers Group. We didn't have to rely on donor funding. We did not have to rely on shifting priorities of donors, and that made this possible. It made it possible for us to make mistakes and to figure out how to pivot and really work deeply with the miners that we're buying diamonds from. And with support, obviously, comes funding. So we can't fund everything that we would like to fund in the sector in Sierra Leone, let alone any other countries where we may expand. So that funding, I believe, needs to involve the entire value chain. So if we're talking about upstream right now, which is currently mainly where GemFair operates, we buy diamonds from miners in Sierra Leone. We export them out of the country into the midstream of the diamond industry at this point. We've auctioned our diamonds off. Hopefully very soon we can announce that, oh, thank you, I keep forgetting. Hopefully very soon we can announce that these diamonds will be available for sale in a form that most jewelers can use, so cut and polished. But that does come with a price, right? Because we are making a very big upfront investment to work hand in hand with the miners, make sure that they're mining safely, that they are mitigating their environmental impacts, and that we have a team on the ground that is working day in and day out, going to their sites to help them improve their practices. That comes with a cost.
Can I add one thing?
Yeah, of course.
Ruby and I talk a lot because we have very similar programs. The Moyo program is very similar to GemFair in some ways. And one thing that Ruby told me is that the miners sell to her program because they buy all of it.
Yeah.
Not
don't
just
pick and choose.
one gem, not just one diamond, not just a couple, but the entire mine run. And that means like little specks and the big stuff, but like not just, they don't have the privilege of just buying a little thing. They have to buy all of it because their competitors buy all of it.
Yep. Absolutely.
So
Thanks.
why do they sell to her or her colleagues? Because they've been there for a few years and they buy all of it.
Yeah. And I think the fourth element is a whole life cycle approach. So this goes actually back to the first, which is what are the incentives for miners? We had a bit of a discussion this morning about alternative livelihoods and in the ASM sector, the artisanal mining sector. So what could that look like when there are climate shocks that are making, for instance, fishing or agriculture more difficult? I think we should look at what's the role in the climate space that artisanal miners could play. So for instance, carbon sequestration using nature-based solutions to sequester carbon in formerly mined areas through agriculture or reforestation, which comes with an income. Carbon credits come with an income. So those are my stream of consciousness ideas, but excited to hear from the rest of the panel as well.
Thanks so much, Ruby. So Giorgio, we've been talking, so far about collaboration externally, how we can partner better, how we can imagine scaling up our work, and part of that involves working with others. The big elephant in the room that we all know is government, right? And the need to continue to bring government back into this conversation. We've been in a period where government has, in many ways, seemed like a very difficult partner, and so a lot of working around government, right? So from your perspective in Brazil, I mean, this whole idea of strengthening institutions at the governmental level, putting government at the center, creating that leadership, can you offer some reflections from Brazil on that?
Yes, yes, sure. Well, the question, or the challenge, is to mobilize and engage the institutions and local agencies. If they are not engaged, if they are not being part of the solution, it's very difficult to scale up. If we take ARM's example, they are putting a lot of effort in Brazil with the cooperatives, okay, and working to scale up. And lots of difficulties like Ruby just mentioned, okay? So we need to strengthen and make the institutions and the agencies aware of the problem and bring them to discuss solutions and help us to scale down as well. So we work both ways. That's the only way, I guess. In terms of what can we do in terms of engagement, is like anything from geological services available to the ASM sector, audits, inspections. ASM they don't like inspections, right? But we need those to make sure the regulations are in place. So we need to help them understanding that it's not the same to send an inspector to Newmont and send the same inspector to an ASM district. The welcome is not the same, I guarantee, okay? And we need to help them understand the problem and find a solution, okay? The other side is empowering, like educational institutions and encourage partnerships for capacity building. One thing, perhaps, Rachel, 10, 15 years ago, we were discussing how hard it is to get data from the ASM sector. Very hard. Well, nowadays we have plenty of data, but we are not doing enough analysis, right? So we need to put more efforts towards analyzing the data that we have, and rather than perceptions, getting to conclusions based on data, based on data analysis, okay? So I would like to see more engagement from educational institutions to help this capacity building in general and data analysis. And the third one is something that MBT mentions, is regional hubs for governance, okay? Governance is a big issue. If we depend on federal government, especially in a large country like Brazil, it's very hard to get the effect of from federal level down to local level, right? So regional hubs could be provincial, could be by district, I don't know, in terms of encouraging governance processes and all these principles that we're talking about here to ensure responsible sourcing, okay? So they have to understand the issue, the challenge at the local level and implement that also in local level. So I would say these three actions would help us moving from isolated efforts to a more country level solution. And MBT discusses the role of government all the time, right? And I bring back what Brad said yesterday. We need to make sure the government takes action. They make decisions. They are trying to avoid the discussion of ASM. We need to put that in the top of their priorities in terms of public policy. Okay?
Thank you. So Christina, you and and I would say everyone here at this table actually have been very engaged, devoted to the issue of gender inclusion more broadly. And for me, I think the work that we have done with you around Moyo, work with others, where we have focused on empowering or giving women more agency, to me has created some of the best routes towards sustainability in the sector. And I was wondering, and why then to Estelle's and Brad's panel earlier, why investing in responsibility actually creates, it's not just a good business case, it actually creates a lot of opportunity in the future, right, the medium term. Talk us through a bit about inclusion, and very practically give people a sense in the room of just how transformative that has been.
Yeah, first I just kind of want to talk about the beauty of knowing your supply chain, because I think it can be scary. If you just attend a conference like this, you hear a lot about crime and conflict and things like that, but there are 45 million people working in 80 countries around the world. There are folks in Greenland using shovels and picks and human strength to pull rubies from the earth. There are women in Tanzania who farm and then go to the fields and work together to share their physical strength and pull tourmalines and beautiful, bright pink garnets from a soil. Wouldn't you love to have that talk about kind of consumer, that story to your consumers? So there can be like these beautiful customer stories and these beautiful sustainability stories, and you have this option to determine where you work. But that first step is figuring out who's in your supply chain. And 1/3 of all miners worldwide are women, and people have no idea. And even people who work in the mining sector will kind of look at you strangely. And I was actually in Ghana. I was a guest of the ambassador a few years ago when they had a mining ban. against gold miners. And people were like, oh, there's women don't mine here. And I was like, there's actually an association of women miners, so let's go talk to them. And then, and I was like, and ask these questions. And then, yeah, a whole line of women walked in and they mined, and I asked them questions. And of course, the women miners there, you just have to ask about them. So they're about 1/3 of all women worldwide. Well, 1/3 of all miners worldwide are women. And so people don't think about them. And so then they get left out of these opportunities, these conversations. And once you find out they're there, then you start asking about them. And so in terms of inclusion, you have to be proactive, but first you have to know your supply chain. So I co-created Moyo. Moyo Gems Moyo means heart in Kiswahili. And I call it my dream come true. I co-created it with the Tanzanian Women Miners Association. It's called TWOMA, 6 years ago, 6.5 years ago. I worked at PACT until very recently, and now I have my own consultancy. So if you need help understanding your supply chain, let me know. TWOMA, the Tanzanian Women Miners Association, their members actually asked for more market opportunities. So the idea for Moyo actually came from the miners themselves. And we created this beautiful initiative based on their request. And me and my Western feminist idea was like, oh, it's going to be women only. And then I was educated by the miners and by my team that actually men need to be involved too. Because, men mine, I guess. They're men. They're miners too, I guess. And it's because men have always created spaces for women miners. They actually mine together. And if we cut them out, you're cutting out allies. You're cutting out people who were mining with the ladies. And you're actually making the ladies more insecure. You're actually making them targets. So I actually need to be inclusive by allowing men in the program. So I couldn't just, be my righteous self and decide things for other people. I had to listen to others. So I'm sorry to talk so much, but so my first step is listen to people who are actually there. And then we actually got to 50-50. So we started off with 60% targets, and now we're at 50-50, but we started with women to get to that 50-50 number. Because one thing I've learned over the years of watching these reform programs is when you don't start with women, they're always an afterthought. And so we are the most gender diverse program in mining because we started with women. There is no other program that even comes close. Punto. And because we started with women. Now, if you don't do that, the numbers are 5% women, maybe 30, but we're 50-50 now. That's a victory, right? So now our focus is actually youth. And that's actually 50-50 from the start because youth get it. And there's actually more opportunities for education. So boys and girls are going to school together. So I just want one more thing about inclusivity, which is the standards. So in colored gemstones, the standards are written for large companies. So there is no colored gemstone standard that is written for artisanal and small-scale miners. The only existing standard is the RJC, and I love them. It's a standard out there, but it's only written for large-scale companies. And it's a cruel irony because 80 to 90% of all colored gemstones are mined by artisanal miners. Yet there's no standard in the world that covers that segment. That's a cruel irony, right? So we want to be inclusive and who's able to service the jewelry community. And when you start being standards focused, you're leaving all these people out. And again, you can have a beautiful sector, these beautiful sustainability stories, but you have to be able to include them, and you have to think about responsibility differently. So I'll pause.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you so much, Christina. So Longo, we're going to end with you. And I really, when we were putting together the panel, I said, Lisa, I really want Longo on the panel. And Longo was like, I don't know anything about ASM, Rachel. But then we sat and talked yesterday. I have been so inspired meeting you last year and hearing about your work and your commitment to various countries, and we heard more about it yesterday. And then we started talking yesterday, and you said, actually, I think I know how we could do something. So I was wondering if you could, Anne, sort of as an ambassadress, an ambassador for the jewelry sector, I mean, what does being involved somehow in the upstream, at the mine face, or in a country around ASM as a jeweler, what could that look like, quite practically?
Okay. So first of all, thanks for having me here, and thanks for this initiative and involving us in the consultation process. I think, as I've said, I'm not an expert in ASM. But what I think is important is what we bring as an association is the people that you're trying to gather as part of this initiative, and that's the people on the ground on the continent. And I've also learnt about this through my experience in gathering African jewelers together. I'm African and I'm Zambian, but I live in London. I've studied in England most of my life. It doesn't negate my Africanness, but I don't have a right to speak to people on the ground, which is a recurrent theme we all have. But my approach to the association is very much, I've got a platform, I'm a diasporan African, I'm a person that wants to help the continent. I can use my voice and platforms like this to do so. So in terms of MBT, I think it's important to understand that we in this room and in the global industry should be reactive rather than proactive. The proactiveness has to come from the ASM, and as Ruby said, who says they want our help? So I feel this consultation should engage more people as far as the association is concerned. Where we can lend support through our new membership is bringing these people on board. I also think it's not so much, like Giorgio said, within a country itself, you're talking about federal then regional. This is an ambitious project where you're talking about global. So I think reading the document, a few things come to mind. It's great in theory, and I mean that respectfully. But we also need to consider how it will work on a global basis. Will it become another bureaucratic project? Which, as you've said, it becomes a pilot that never kicks off. But that said, I don't think that will be the case, because I know your commitment to this, and I think you're doing the right thing in getting several people on board. From my perspective, I would also like to share a bit more briefly, so I did prepare some slides, just to give some insight into how I think initiatives on the ground can interface with ASM in new ways that probably haven't been tried or tested before. So,
Great.
Okay.
We may have to minimize Edward. I'm not sure. Sorry, Edward. I don't think we can do both.
Can we go to a vote on that?
Okay, so I'll try to talk through them very quickly. There are quite a few slides, but in essence, I'm not going to talk through all of them. This is just, sorry, can we make it a bit slower? Sorry. Sorry. Okay, so again, this is a very important quote because again, it goes to the people that center around these discussions. And as you can see, that was a quote by Dr. Gaetano. And he has constantly talked about the people that all of our decisions impact. You can go to the next one. He's queried why, even though the industry is built on African resources largely, where are the African players in this industry? Dr. K.Y. Amwako of ASET is our other patron, and I very much like this quote because he's saying, in introducing the jewelry and gemstone industry into the African economy, it has the potential to change basically the trajectory of African economies. And he is a global and leading economic specialist. So, yep, so that's just more about who we are. You can just, I think it was meant to go on a reel, so it's just to give people an idea. So the more interesting things we'll get to is actual images of our work and what we've been doing on the ground. It's very fast. It's fine. No, it's fine. It's fine.
We just, we don't have a lot of time, and so I'm just
Yeah,
wondering,
yes. So we'll just
where
go
do you want to
to
go?
the images of what we've done and why it's important to engage people on the ground. So for the first time, we hosted the first jewelry and gemstone competition for Africans in the diaspora and on the continent, and it was entitled "It's All in Our Hands," further to emphasize the importance of including Africans at the coalface and the diaspora in these conversations. Related to the discussion we're having, the importance of this is always understanding that even if we talk about artisanal miners, we are also talking about their customers who could be the jewelry makers on the continent and globally, training opportunities, marketing exposure for the ASM. So not to think of ASM in isolation. So just go to the pictures and that's it. So these are the people we work with, both schools and organizations. So, and I'd like to end with highlighting, because I did promise them I would mention them, the winners of our first competition and examples of their work. So that was the poster for our competition. That's our partner school in London. And then, oh, you can keep going, sorry. And these are some of the winners of our competition who represented different African countries. The interesting thing about all of this is some of them had problems actually sourcing gemstones. So if we had mechanisms where people on the ground could actually source locally, whether from industrial or ASM miners, that would also be, if you like, at the risk of sounding corny, a beautiful story to tell. So it ends with just images of what they submitted, and as you can see, I'm wearing some of their pieces as well, so that's it.
Oh yeah, you have the earrings.
Yes.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, everyone. This was it was an interesting panel, I think, you know, trying to explore really this concept of how we can work together, trying to find ourselves in the midst of a problem, but also part of its solutions. We're going to continue with lunch, where we can continue some of these discussions. And thank you again to everyone for your time today.